Welcome back to Great Northern Cascade Division in N-Scale. My name's Ian, and for the last 2 or 3 weeks things have been a little bit quiet on the channel because I've been building this little helix behind me. So now we've got connections between the middle deck right here, so this is kind of the west side of Monroe, and then getting up onto the upper deck here, which comes into Snohomish, Everett, and then makes its way around along the Puget Sound to into Bay Yard, and then onward to Seattle. So we've got a 20-car freight train led by a pair of F units that's going to make its way up through the helix as we go through this. This helix build was being the most exciting and nerve-wracking part of kind of this whole layout so far for me. So way back February of last year, so almost 2 years ago now, it's the middle of December here, when I first started building the basement, or getting the basement finished, ready to start building the layout, I knew that I was going to need not one but 2 helixes. There's actually going to be another helix that will connect the middle deck down to the bottom deck. This is the smaller of the helixes that I'm going to have. The other one is going to be kind of hidden underneath basically the Cascade Mountains where the Cascade Tunnel will go through, so it'll be a little bit bigger in terms of the radius and stuff like that. But I thought, well, let's try getting this one going because all of the track work for the main lines is done on the upper deck, and then on the middle deck I've got about 2/3, 3/4 of the main line done as well. And so it was kind of getting to the point where it was a little bit boring having to manually move trains between the 2 different decks that I have, or just say, well, I can get a train all the way at the top deck and now I've got to reverse it all the way back around. So this video probably does get kind of long. I've got a bunch of different how-to stuff throughout it, a bunch of different time-lapse stuff throughout it as well. So let's go and look at the helix now, talk about it for 2 or 3 minutes just to kind of set some foundation so that rather than, jumping straight into the comments, asking questions or making suggestions, let's go over how the helix is put together, the dimensions, the radius, the climb, all that kind of fun stuff. And then if you're just kind of jumping through the video, you're not missing out on any of the important stuff. So hope you like this one. It is really cool now that they can move trains around. I will do a video coming up in the next few days where I actually take the Empire Builder all the way from Seattle through to Skycomish now. The Empire Builder runs through here just fine. Those long passenger trains, long passenger cars have no problem getting up this helix as well. Alright, so as that freight train makes its way off the helix and off towards into Bay, let's talk a little bit about this helix for a few minutes before we get into the actual how-to part and time-lapse part of the construction. So the helix itself has to climb about 10.5 inches between the base platform here and then the upper deck. You're going to stop this train as we spin around, and so coming out of Monroe we then have this 8-foot section here that does climb a little bit, and basically it picks up the height of that, which is about 2.5 inches. So the helix itself then climbs about 10.5 inches. It does that through 3.5 turns of the helix. The helix itself, the track is at 18-inch radius. So we've got just over 3 by 3 foot base here, 36 by 36 inches. Each of the helix rings are cut in one segment, so one ring is just one segment. I had seen different ways of doing this. There's different trends of thought, and if you even need a helix or if you want to do a continuous climb, but let's put that debate aside. I needed a helix based on the design and the track plan that I had. So different trends of thought on how you cut it. Either do one big segment as basically a big circle, or if you cut it in smaller segments, 4 segments, you maybe save a little bit of plywood, but to me that added a little bit of complexity. You had to be a little bit more precise with the cuts, and it made a little bit more work than kind of joining the segments together. So joining the segments together, I think they're called mending braces or mending brackets, just to kind of join each of those segments together. The grade on this, a little bit steeper than maybe I wanted and that some people would maybe appreciate, but again, freight train goes through it, no problem. 14-15 car Empire Builder with 3 F units goes through this, no problem. The lower deck starts out at about 2.75%. By the time we get to the upper deck, we've dropped it to about 2.5%. Again, different trends of thought on that. I've seen some people that do a spiral helix where The grade is a little bit different. The radius is changing as you go through to try and make it a little bit easier on the trains once the whole thing is in there. But honestly, 2.5, 2.75%, it's fine because I'm just doing the 3.5 turns. If I was trying to move 18 inches, 20 inches, I don't know, I might have wanted to broaden it up a little bit. But for my purposes, this works out just fine. Model railroading is always about compromises, so someone's going to ask, why didn't you just broaden it out and make a broader radius? Well, because I've got that egress window in the basement, and I need to have 3 feet clearance to that. Could I have just moved it this way? I could, but then I start to encroach on where Spokane stations are going to be. And so all of this is about compromise. There's more than enough room for a helix. Could it have been bigger? Maybe, but then I start to kind of eat into space other areas. But again, this worked out just fine. The long Empire builder will go through it without any problems. Connecting it, it is 1/4 inch threaded steel rod, and it's then I think it's 20 threads per inch, so 1/4 by 20, and then the decks are just kind of held together with nuts, washer, the deck itself, and then another washer and a nut. So as you go through and we do this, makes it a little bit easier for me to then adjust it as I was going through. The main thing with building the helix is getting that first deck in place really well, and then the rest of it just kind of layers on top of that. Now, when I go through the video, you will see that I have this cool little tool that I use for figuring out the grade, and it's actually it's percent that it's figuring out. So it's like, okay, at 0 it's angles rather than it's at 90 degrees, then you're at 45 degrees kind of thing. And so this isn't actually showing a grade, it's showing an angle. And so there's times in the video that I'll talk about we're at a 1.6% grade. It's not, it's 1.5 or 1.6 degrees, and if you do the math it ends up at about 2.75%. And so that did throw me the first couple of times when I started doing the bottom deck, and then I realized, no, we're looking at an angle, we're not looking at a percent. So there are different digital levels that you can get absolutely that will show a grade, or that can change between a grade and a percent. That's just what I had. Once I figured out the math on it, it worked out just fine. And again, trends move through it, no problem. I do also have underneath, I have a Digitrax BD4N that's doing block detection, so I'm actually keeping track of where the train is as it moves through each of these different levels of the helix. I'm going to have a separate video that talks about the BD4N. It's not that complicated, but this was already getting a long video, and there was already a lot that was going on in it. So yeah, hopefully you enjoy this one. Hopefully that makes sense. This was the first time I've built a helix completely from scratch. I've worked on layouts that have helix on them, and I've also worked on layouts and helped redo layouts where they just had one turn where it was climbing up a little bit, going through a tunnel, and so it was just showing a little bit of elevation change. I wouldn't really call it a helix, but honestly it wasn't that bad. I was quite happy with the progress that I made as I went through it. A couple of little things to take care with if you go ahead and make one yourself is make sure you get all the little filings if you're using steel rod when you cut it. I use a magnet inside of a plastic bag just to pick up all the filings, otherwise your train motors would love munching those up. The other thing, I'm completely forgetting the name, gentleman from down in Australia who has a wonderful part of a club and a wonderful layout down there that's doing almost the exact same region. It's fictional layout around the Cascade area. I think they were doing Calgary down to Seattle through the Cascades. Was when you move between the two different decks, essentially you end up creating a reverse loop almost. And so I kind of thought, okay, do I need to put in an auto reverser somewhere within the helix? And it's just like, no, all I ended up doing is that for the power booster, the Digitrax booster that controls the middle deck, I basically just swapped blue and white for the phase of the DCC signal, and that gets sent out, and that will work out just fine. You don't have to change any of the wiring. You still follow the same idea of consistent color wiring for the rails. All you're doing is out the booster, you're just swapping it. And so I've got insulated rail joints top and on the bottom, and it's really not a problem. I'm not creating a short. I could have actually just had metal joiners and it would have been fine. This is for block detection. But when I then have my helix on the other side to go from the middle deck to the lower deck, I'll have the same thing. I'll essentially create a reverse loop, and so then the power booster that controls the bottom deck will be correct. So again, your wiring doesn't have to change necessarily. It's just the phase that you send out from your DCC station. But if you're running DCC, you would have to think through that, because essentially you're creating a reverse loop here in that your the back rail, by the time it goes all the way through the helix, is the front rail when it gets up onto your next deck. So just a couple of gotchas about the polarity as you go through, picking up iron filing, stuff like that. The rest of it I try and cover in the video. So I hope you enjoy this one. You know, please do like, subscribe, and follow along, because now that I've got this done, I've got all the main lines done on the upper deck. I've got, you know, 3/4 of the main line done on the middle deck, all the way to Skycomish, where the Empire Builder is parked up, just to prove that the Empire Builder does make it through the helix just fine. Has gone up and down, but it's a heck of a thing trying to reverse this thing back through the helix. So it's going to be parked up there until I manually decide to flop it around. But this then, where the 3D printer is where that second helix is going to go in at some point, but you can make a little bit more progress on getting the track work around. But now that I'm in the mindset of having built a helix, I might actually tackle that other helix next, since I already kind of have my mind working as to how we do this. So enjoy this one. It is a little bit of a long one, but you know, hopefully you enjoy it. Hopefully it's useful if you're going to go ahead and build a helix yourself. So this is just 1.5 inch diameter lid that I had, but helpfully inside of it, it kind of has cross hatching on it, so I can easily line it up across the center line, and I know where my middle part is. So I just draw a semicircle around it, and that's where the threaded rod's going. All right, hopefully I don't mess this up. These are about $50 sheets of wood. Different ways that you can do this. I've seen people make fairly involved jigs to do this. I'm literally just going to take a jigsaw to it, because honestly the finish of the outside of the cuts isn't as important to me. I've got 2-inch wide strip, which is more than enough by the time the track goes down. Really all I care about is that nice smooth finish on the wood, so that it's got a very stable surface. I'm putting in 8 pieces of threaded rod to support it. So basically every 45 degrees around this circle, it's going to be supported. Again, I've seen different ways that people do this. This is just a way that I've seen work fairly reliably. Never tried this, but I'm going to give it a whirl. Worst that happens is I have to figure out where to put additional blocks of support in, which again is why I've made it about 2 inches wide, even though I'm only doing single track. It's that if I need to then go back and say, okay, I've got my threaded rod that's holding it at the gradient that I want. If I then find that there's ever so slight sags, basically, you know, every, what will it be, 16th of a turn around, if I've got rods at every 8th of the turn, if I need to go back and put in strips of wood, then I can do that, and I feel a little bit more comfortable about being able to cut a much smaller number of pieces of wood that are then just supporting it, rather than actual having to have the perfect gradient as we go around. And the threaded rod means that I can adjust it too, whereas if I go with those blocks of wood all the way around to begin with, then that's kind of the gradient that I'm set at. If I'm then finding that actually those really long passenger trains, nah, not so much. So I'm hoping all that measuring and marking out, I just have to do this first time. After that, this then basically becomes a template, right? When I do the other ones, I can just lay it down on the plywood, draw around it, and cut through it. All this sounds really, really good in theory. I haven't actually tried this out yet, so I'm actually gonna grab the drill to drill a couple of holes to get me started on the inside there, and then probably it's pretty slow going to try and get this cut out. well. Didn't completely mess it up. I think what I'll do next time, people were probably screaming if they could see in the sped up video, is actually drill holes right at the edges of all the little semicircles where the threaded rod's going to be, make it a little bit easier with the jigsaw. But did work. It is a little bit wasteful, sure. I have seen ways where people will cut them into like 4 segments, and so they'll do a quarter of an arc and make basically 4 segments out of the circle, and that way you lay it down on the sheet of plywood, you cut out the 4 different segments, and then you have to have joiner plates that go between them and make sure that you then have a very smooth transition between them. Does it save some amount of lumber? Sure, but in the grand scheme of things, is it really worth it for the extra work, the extra effort? For me, it's not. Now again, totally up to you, your railroad, do however you want. This might end up being a completely failed helix, we don't know. But I think to do the outside ones, I'm going to put some holes on the outside of those little semicircles where the thread rod's going to be, and we'll get that cut out and see what it looks like. Well, we have one. I'm not going to do the hula, but that worked a whole lot better. Drilling in the holes. Still not perfect. Still going to clean it up a little bit, especially since this is going to be my template one, and I'm going to draw around. Just in terms of what do I mean, right on the corners, just need to tidy it up a little bit. Really won't affect anything. Again, I'm not super concerned about how the outside of it looks. You're not going to actually see it. It's not going to be a visual feature at all. Would I want to do this HO scale? No, it's way too big. I probably would figure out some kind of a jig and completely different tool to be able to do it. Probably. But this works fine. And since I'm only having to do 4 rings of it, this has taken, GoPro said, 30 minutes total. But I think that also includes, marking everything out, cutting some of the other stuff. I think I cut the base 3x3 foot section first, but then marking it all out, measuring it, cutting it that first time. I think now, once I've cleaned this up, it'll be pretty easy just to lay it down as a template, draw it out and go for it. Probably 20 minutes a circle. So we're still in for 2 hours total, I guess, including cutting that base. So I'm going to clean this up. Probably stop the GoPro for doing that, clean this up, and then I'll do a quick time lapse as I draw it out on the other one and then start getting another one cut out. All right, me and the garage queen behind me are getting kind of cold, but this is that first ring all sanded. Happy with how it came out. Again, it works as a good template, and from however far away, when you're looking at it, you really can't tell whatever imperfections. I am not going for woodworking awards in building any of this layout, as you've seen from what's already down in the basement, but it ends up working out fine. Trains run quite happily, and once you've got some amount of scenery down, really aren't going to know something. So I'm going to take a break, warm up, go get some lunch, and then come out and draw 3 more of these out on the plywood and get them cut out. effort to be able to get under there, but do now have second one done. Again, need to clean it up a little bit, hit it with the sander. Not perfect, as you can probably tell if you're watching it in 4K on your big 65-inch TV, but again, it'll work fine. All I care about is how smooth and flat the actual road surface is for the trends. So 2 more of these now. Should be pretty quick going. That was only about 15-20 minutes or so by the time you lay it down, draw it out, and cut it out. So pretty quick progress, and then can head down to the little bit warmer basement to actually try and put some of this in place. All right, there is so much sawdust in here, but it was either that or deal with all of the snow outside. But do have all 4 of those rings cut. They are sanded. They don't look like they're perfectly aligned because they're not stacked up perfectly aligned. And then that slightly over 3 foot by 3 foot base. So I'm gonna do a little bit of cleanup and get all of this gear back down into the basement along with the assorted mess of tools, and then we can check it out and start to actually drill some holes and get the rods in place ready to start putting in that first ring. Right, down to the basement we have come. It's also the next day. Got the rings roughly lined out. Like I said, they don't line up absolutely millimeter perfect, but close enough for what we're doing here. It's kind of hard to see, but I did also hit it with a miter saw down the middle just to cut it so that that's where the rings are going to split. Miter saw means that they're all hopefully cut fairly evenly. We'll see once it actually lines up. I do have it clamped in place. This is nail gunned on, so the actual base material is in place properly. And then I've got the rings kind of clamped down in place because my plan is to take a 1/4-inch drill bit and basically drill down through one of these. The idea is that we have this 1/4 inch diameter, and then it's 20 threads per inch, so 1/4 by 20. And you can use, whatever rod that you want, really. If it was going to be a bigger helix, if it was going to have more rings, you might want something a little bit stronger. But for what I'm doing for N scale, 18-inch radius, 4 rings, then 1/4 by 20 will be fine. And so what will happen is we'll drill down through all of the layers and feed the rods through. And I'll probably do 1 or 2, I don't know if I'll do both sides first, just to hold it in place. And once we've got it in place and we've got it coming through so that it's locked in place at least, then we can drill the other ones that make sure that all the other holes will line up. Don't want these to slip at all, because then obviously when they go in, it's not going to be able to line up properly and it's going to kind of twist it. So I'm going to try and get a fairly level hole that will come straight through there. Nuts and washers on the bottom, top, just to hold it in place. And even though we've got all 4 rings together, what you'll see in time is that we just do it layer by layer, where there'll be a washer and a nut on the bottom, a washer and a nut on the top of each ring, and that's how you're kind of going to hold them in place, and just slowly adjust it as you go around. Track down, do the next ring, adjust it, track down next ring, and so on and so on. And so in theory, it means that if the grade isn't right, if you need to change the grade, in theory, then you can just go back and adjust it ever so slightly. Will be a little bit harder once all the track's in place, but at least for getting it going this first time around, hopefully we get it right first time, get it going. So I'm gonna get this first hole drill, get the first rod in, and then can go ahead and drill the rest of the holes. One thing that I am going to do is make a little doodah, little tool that I saw Ron from Run Trends and things do. Basically get a bolt, chuck it in, and I'm going to cut some of the pink foam to basically act as a swirly to be able to spin down those nuts. I hadn't been sure how hard it was going to be, since I cut those threaded rods to 18 inches long, it's still going to be a little bit slow and a little bit boring to spin all those nuts down. So I'm going to make a little doodah. All right, doohickey built, and it's really just long bolt with a piece of pink insulation foam that is then just chucked on the top bottom with a nut and a washer just to hold it in place, and then just really loosely cut it into a circle. It's not even a very good circle, it doesn't have to be, but then what happens is as you very slowly rotate the drill, basically it just spins that bolt around for you way quicker than it does if you do it by hand, and also kind of gets rid of the repetitive strain injury from trying to do it with your fingers. So I think I'm now gonna probably lift off the rings and get the threaded rod up through the bottom, get it locked in place such that I'll be able to start putting on that first ring, and then just kind of slowly take it from there. So I'm going to take them off, put the rods on, you'll see this little doodah in action, and then we can start to actually get this first ring in, get it leveled, and get it all adjusted. Alright, this is where our turnout mud is always going to be, right on top of one of the cross beams. There were two that weren't right on top, thankfully. They were just over on the side. I guess I hadn't been perfectly square in the cross piece that was underneath it. That was fine, just had to drill it out a little bit more. I got enough room to get the washer and the bolt underneath, but they're all fine. So that's now all in place. Let's move the camera and go and take a little bit of a look and see what's actually going on over here. And so now hopefully it makes a little bit more sense. I haven't plugged the microphone in, so the audio might be a little bit different just with the front microphone. But this is now all of the threaded steel rods in place. They're all tightened up. They're not really going anywhere. They're fairly solidly in place now. So what I'll do is put basically another now nut and washer onto this nut and then the washer, because then that first ring is going to sit down on top of that. I'm just going to loosely kind of put it in place and then figure out with the little level, figure out getting the grade all the way around. And so this is where it might get a little bit fiddly, because it will be loosely get it right and then tighten it and then probably come back and forth and back and forth and back and forth to make sure that we end up keeping that grade fairly consistently as we go up through this helix. So let's get the other nuts and washers on. I need to probably wrap some tape around my little doodah. This worked great, but it did then start to kind of break up towards the end. But I think if I just wrap it with some tape, that'll stop it falling apart anymore. But I did make it so much easier. The only problem is some of the adhesive on the top of the rod where the barcode sticker was on it makes it a little bit hard. You kind of have to hand tighten it first for the first couple of inches, and then whoomph, it goes down in about 10 seconds, 15 seconds if that. So let's get that taped up, and then we can get the rest of the nuts and washers on, ready for that first ring to drop down in place. Well, now the fun part is trying to get all of that adjusted. So this is where it's going to be a little bit slow and fiddly, and just kind of do one little bit at a time, try and maintain that gradient all the way up. Just going to do the bottom first, and then I'll drop washers and nuts down on top once I've got the height adjusted all the way around, and then we'll probably have to go back and do ever so slight small little adjustments along the way after that as well. But let's try and get the grade that we want on this first ring, and then tighten it down and move on to track. It'll be fun. Goodness, that was definitely a little bit of back and forth to try and get everything set correctly, but as you can see from the digital level, it's kind of hovering right between 1.6, 1.7. The grade's going to be right around 1.7, something like that. But it has like a 0.1 degree of accuracy, so I'm okay. But as you move around, everything's pretty much reading 1.6, 1.7 degrees. And then side to side, see if it's going to prove me wrong, 0.1 degrees, and again, 0.1 degree of accuracy. And that's just so that as the trend's coming around, it doesn't have any kind of crazy super elevation, because by the time you have the grade, about 1.6, 1.7, and then you have the radius, and there is some, and I'm terrible at math, and someone's going to point out that this is completely wrong, but there's a rough rule of thumb as to how much, essentially, it's not grade, but the equivalent of grade, drag, basically, you add by going around a curve. And so the rough rule of thumb is 32 divided by the radius of your curve, and so 32 divided by 17 and a bit, it adds, I can't remember exactly what it was, my math isn't great, and I'm not even going to try and do it, but by the time you would add the grade of the actual helix, and then you would add the drag, or the effective additional grade that you're adding by going around how much higher the locomotives have to work by the radius, and the last thing you want to try and do is add adverse camber to that. So 0.1 degrees and a slight bit of camber just to help the train go around. That's kind of about what I was going for. Certainly don't want it the other way. So if there is 0.1, 0.2 degrees, it's always pointing into the middle so that the train will be able to bank around it. The last thing that you want, like I say, is to have camber going side to side. It's going to cause too much additional problems for the locomotives. So, like I said, a little bit slow, a little bit fiddly getting this one going and making sure that I ended up with the right distance that I wanted over there. In case you're wondering what's going to happen here, I'm going to kind of step back, try and get a piece of track to kind of show you what it will be. Essentially coming from Monroe, we've got the track kind of on the outside, and what will happen is the track will bend. I'll add a little bit in here, but it's fine. But the track will come in somewhere like that, actually not straight, it's going to bend through, and so it will go underneath here. There's plenty of clearance to be able to do that, and so again, over this 8-foot section we need to climb up 2.5 inches, something like that, which again is going to be about a 1.7-ish% grade to be able to get from Monroe into the bottom of the helix. And so it'll be a fairly straight shot, so that, you know, I'm not going to have an S or anything like that. It's going to be a very, very gentle curve, not really even much of a curve at all, just to get you into that helix. Have the train as straight as possible, as little as drag as possible coming through this section, even though you're coming up that grade, but just kind of get the locos ready going up that hill in somewhat of a straight line, and then hit that helix. Hopefully we'll be okay. Kind of the same that we have up here as we would have come out of Everett and Snohomish, or coming into Snohomish area here. Very, very gentle curve, just so that you get the train somewhat straight. You're not putting additional drag coming in and out of this helix. So I'm going to take a little bit of a break, probably get some dinner, and then we'll come back at some point and look at track. Fairly straightforward, other than having to do it all in one big curve, just one section of track that I'm going to drop in feeders for, and I'm also going to try and figure out this BD4N block detection, because it would be kind of cool. This does have built-in output for status LEDs. It would be kind of cool that as the trains kind of go around the different levels, that the block detection would be able to figure out what particular ring that they're on, and then Beck will be able to tell me. The block detection will be able to figure out what ring they're on and have some kind of status, indicator moving through. Because once finished, took me a while. Once finished, there'll be a big, essentially fascia that covers all of this. You won't be able to see into it. The only way you'll be able to see into it will be walking around, what's currently Japanese layer, what would become Hilliard and the turnaround loop coming out of Spokane. Once you get on that side over by where the window and the laser cutter is, you'll be able to see into the helix. But from the actual layout here itself, you won't be able to see in. So some kind of just visual status indicator will be kind of neat. So yeah, take a break, come back, start figuring out track, start figuring out that block detection. Track is now pinned in place and got the rail joiners in, soldered on the outside. I didn't do any kind of time lapse for this because I had the GoPro batteries charging, but there's really nothing special about this. It's kind of fiddly track wiring. It's basically just one really big curve. And I've done some videos before on track wiring, but really it's the exact same concept as if you were doing something on the rest of the layout. Curves there, or curves around here, curves around here. I am soldering the outside of the rail joiners in here. I don't normally do that on most curves because I have very broad curves, and so it's not that big of a deal. But here in the helix, I have done that, and it's kind of best practice to do it anyway. I just typically don't because I'm lazy and can get away without it. But especially in the helix, want to make sure that these rail joints are really solid, that they're not going to move, that it's going to be able to conduct the DCC current correctly, and that there's not going to be any problems with it. So connect it with the rail joiners, solder to the outside of the rail, and then just very, very gently file it down to make sure that you're pretty much set. So I've got it come feeding in here. I had also put in this little onboarding ramp, which again is right around 1.7 degree of climb, and so I think that that'll flow quite nicely as we come through here. It's very, very gentle to then get into the helix, and then up and away you would go. So we do have the Digitrax BD4N sitting on the front here. That's what I'm going to be using for block detection, and I already have that wired up into the DCC bus. All the DCC is all turned off right now just to make sure that I don't have any problems. I am doing a separate video as they go through this on that. It'll come right after this helix video because I feel like this is kind of worth a video by itself. But the track work itself is fairly straightforward, if a little bit tedious, but it's important to go through and do this kind of ring by ring. Two reasons. One, by the time you have another ring on, how are you going to get in here to try and actually solder the joints, do the feeder wires, get the adhesive glue on, adhesive caulk or glue, whatever it is that you're using. The other one is that you can test it. So once I've got the adhesive caulk on, and once I've got the feeder wires in, then I can run a train up and down, make sure that it runs smoothly. If there's any kind of problems, you need to correct it now before you have all the rings on, because you're just not going to have enough room, especially with my big old clumpy hands. You're not going to have enough room to really get in and do much. So as you go ring by ring, wire it in, test it, and then hopefully by the time we get to the top, it'll all be up and running. So I'm going to get the adhesive caulk down on this so that it can then dry overnight, and then for the feeder wires, I'm probably just going to drop them onto the outside of the rail. Everything else I cut underneath and then I solder under. If you haven't seen some of my previous videos, all of the wires get soldered underneath So sometimes it maybe looks a little bit messy until it's ballasted. If you see a little bit of soil that flows out on the side, but it just avoids having anything on the side of the rails. In here, I don't know if I really care enough to try and do that. Try and drill through and then make sure that I get the feeder wires right there. I think I'm just going to pull them off the side and make it easier, and then they'll just basically run up and down here once they're tied in. I want to keep it away from basically anywhere where it could catch on a train coming down. If wire hanging down, even if it's just a little bit, I want to make sure that this is as smooth as possible for the trains as they run through it. So let's get the track glued down, let's get feeder wires put in, and then we can come back and check it and hopefully see a train running up and down this. Alright, all of the weight is off the track, took out all the pins, got the feeder wires connected up, checked to make sure that we had power to it, and now I have a very short little train hanging out there. So it's just a single locomotive and 4 cars, but it will, make its way up the hill. You gotta remember this is actually starting on a 1.6 or 1.7% grade as well, so the loco is able to pull away. And again, just one loco, 4 cars, but kind of pick these cars as a mix of the different types of cars that I have. They do all have replacement wheels on them, but I know that last car has a little bit of a couple of shimmy. It does kind of bobble backwards and forwards. It does that on the flat, and so I wanted to put this on this helix and see what it would do. I want to make sure that it'll run through it fine. So I have gone up and down, forwards and backwards. I have done a couple of different locomotives, a couple of different cars, and it does go through okay. The main things to look at was when it comes through where the rail joiners are, it just went over one. Absolutely no movement at all from the loco, from any of the cars. Kind of looked at this from different angles to make sure that there's not too much camber, super elevation going on. And then for me, one of the main tests is, okay, well, what about once you start reversing? And so even on the flat, reversing around a corner is always kind of fun. That gives some indication as to how well the track work is put into place. And here again, seems like it's running quite happily up and down. Now, I am not at all planning on reversing down a helix with a full train of 20 cars, but again, it's kind of just a test of the track work to see how it will do. So I'm going to try dropping on some passenger cars and see how that does. Now that I'm comfortable that box cars will move around, try some passenger cars, make sure that they'll run through it okay. And then after that, just kind of rinse and repeat for another 3 of those rings. We'll wait till this one comes to the bottom and then swap over, and we'll get some passenger cars on. Alright, moment of truth is now just 3 passenger cars, single locomotive, but again, just kind of wanting to get some kind of idea as to how it's going to run. And again, we're already going up the hill, 1.6, 1.7% grade, as the locomotive is starting to pull away, but absolutely no problems moving around and doing that. Picked a mix of different cars. We got the Superdome, so 3-axle trucks, wanted to see how that would work. And then that middle sleeper, I think, is one of the Lowell Smith, maybe. But anyway, it's OEM trucks on it. And then the observation car at the end is one where I replaced with Microtrans trucks. Did also replace the wheels with those Eastern Seaboard wheels. But again, I just wanted to get some kind of idea running around here, different types of cars, different types of trucks, different types of wheels, just to kind of see how it all runs. And again, going downwards, this was where I was a little bit unsure, and so I'm going a little bit slower down than coming up. Again, it still runs fine. It's more just my nervousness more than anything else. But I have reversed the full Empire Builder, all the way from Everett, Snohomish, all the way around the upper deck over to Seattle, and it does go through things just fine. The helix, it's going down the hill. The weight of the cars is already wanting to pull it down, but it does go around just fine. So that 1.6, 1.7% grade seems like it works just fine. Not a problem at all for the loco. That kind of was what I was expecting. And so again, by the time you have 9 or 10 passenger cars, it's like, well, there's going to be 3 or 4 engines on the front of this that are going to be pulling it. So that kind of proves out that the helix part works, that the track work is fine, it's smooth, it's flowing. there's no kinks, there's no undulations as it's moving around. I didn't put down any kind of sub-road bed. So if you look at everything else, I have woodland scenic foam sub-road bed. I think it's 1/8 inch. You can also do cork. 1/8 inch cork is fairly common. I have seen people do 1/8 inch tempered hardboard as well. No sub-road bed on the Helix. I've seen kind of both sides of the argument on it. To me, it just adds an unnecessary layer of complication by putting down sub-road bed. Not only do I have to make sure that I have the track flat and level, well, now I've got to do a sub-road bed first, glue that, make sure that's perfectly flat, and then I'm putting the track on top of that. And also it adds height. Now the height is not really a problem for me. I forget exactly what my height is between the decks. I could have made it less of a climb, but honestly with the grid that I have, that works out fine. But if you put sub-road bed on, you're raising it up 1/8 of an inch. And so depending on the separation between decks, you're reducing that height. And if I put through auto rack cars, probably is unlikely, but if I put through double stack container cars, which is possible, I do have some more modern image locomotives, double stack container cars would need that extra height over the passenger cars. And so again, got to figure out what your rolling stock is going to be. This was also designed in terms of the distance between the two rods for these long, 89 foot or so passenger cars, 85, 89 foot passenger cars to go through. So happy with how this has turned out. This video is probably ending up getting pretty long, so I might splice in some kind of time lapses as I go through into the rest of it, but otherwise everything now is just rinse and repeat. The slow part, the tricky part, is making sure that this first ring is put in smoothly, is put in correctly, it has the right grade, because everything then literally just lays on top of that. So I'm going to go ahead and make my way through the rest of the rings on this Helix, and unless I run into a problem and want to talk about it the next time we come back, we'll probably see all the Helix ready to roll. So there goes the little engine that could, making it all the way up to the top of the hill here. As I went up, I did decrease the gradient just a little bit. I figured that by the time we get to the top, it was probably going to be having a little bit of a hard time, and so I think we went from like 1.7 degrees down to about 1.4 degrees when we're up on the top ring there, but makes it up just fine. I do have the block detection wired in as well. Again, separate video that'll be going on that one. Did also make a start on kind of the approach ramp coming in from Monroe areas, west of Monroe. So on the flat a little bit, because there's a turnout that needs to go in just past where the caboose is to split off where the far track will be industries. So I'm going to need a little bit of flat, but then that gentle grade up to be able to join to the bottom of the Helix. Up on top, also added in the turnout that's going to go in there. That'll split to take you off into some of the industries in Snohomish, Everett area. Otherwise, the main line will run through there, and so pretty much, almost ends up coming right through where those rods would be. But I am going to trim the rods. I got a cutoff tool, trim down these rods, and then take a magnet inside a bag to it, because this will just create havoc with a whole bunch of metal shavings, really fine metal shavings. And so if you go through and do that, want some kind of magnet to be able to make sure you pick all those up, because you do not want the locomotives picking that up. And the magnets inside those motors would just love to gobble up a whole bunch of really fine metal filings off these rods. So I'm going to go around and trim those up. I might put some caps on the end just so I don't end up poking my eye out at some point, especially over here. We're going to get them out so that I can put in a flat piece. I do have some 3/4 inch birch ply that I had left over from something that's going to be very, very solid and stable, just to build a platform that will run out to that. And then that should join in quite nicely. Finish off this approach tram coming out from Monroe as well. And hopefully when we come back, we will actually be able to see a trend make its way from Monroe through the helix, which I now know works pretty well, and then make its way into Snohomish and Everett. So pretty excited with how this worked out. I am going to start loading up some more cars as well, although it's pretty hard to try and do inside. So I need to work on one of these two so that I can load up 20 cars or so, and then try going up or down. Probably both, but at least with the mix of 4 test cars of various different qualities, and when I've also tried it with 3 passenger cars of various different qualities, everything's running smoothly. And so I'm pretty sure that once it's loaded up with 20 or so of those box cars, and then 9, 10, a dozen or so of those passenger cars, obviously more than one locomotive pulling it, I'm pretty sure that it's going to handle this grid just fine. So let's do some cleanup work and then come back and check it out when everything's ready to roll.